Hi, I'm Tim. Join me as we unbox, take a look at, and test fly the UMX Pitts S-1S ready to fly micro RC model airplane. Let's get to it. This is the E-flite model of the Pitts S-1S. The 1 stands for the single-seater, the 2 is a two-seater version. The Pitts was built or designed in 1943 by Curtis Pitts, just hand-drawn plans in his workshop. And the plane was a hit right off the bat. It had smaller engines at the beginning, but as it progressed and pilots became familiar with it, engines were increased. Professional plans were drawn up in the 1960s. It went over to the factory for a while producing it, and in 2015, Aircraft Spruce Specialties has a complete kit of all the materials to build your own Pitts. Again, it's a very popular airplane. Even today, it's a world-class competitor. In 1967, it won the U.S. World Acrobatic Championships. It's just a well-known airplane, known everywhere that it flies. You have to know what you're doing to fly one of these airplanes, but everybody that flies it absolutely loves it, and it makes for a very interesting radio control model airplane. A viewer of the channel, John from Michigan, very nicely asked me if I would like to test fly some airplanes to include ready to fly and Aguilo's kit of the Spitfire, and I said, sure. So these arrived in the mail today. John, thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead right now and with you unbox it, take a look at it, go over the setup. I'll show you how to bind your radio to this model, and then we'll take it out for a test flight at the field. So this is a very nice kit. It lists everything needed. Notice it's got the AS3X system. This is the automatic stabilization in 3 axes. It's a magic in the radio system receiver that's adapted from their fly-barless helicopters that adds a amount of stability to these models. These little models can be very twitchy and hard to fly. And the idea with the AS3X, it should give it a much more solid feeling to let the model fly better as well as dealing with wind. The kit is pretty nice. It says what's in here. It's got the motor installed, a 6-channel. The receiver and servos are in place. The servos and the aileron servos and the wings are in place. However, you're going to have to buy your own battery and battery charger and a transmitter, so it tells you all that stuff up front, which is kind of nice. So let's go ahead and open up the box and see how that goes. So to open up the box, it's a pretty nice little carrying case, and you can see this really is ready to fly. So there's an instruction manual here we'll go through in a minute. Just take off these 2 styrofoam holders and carefully lift out the airplane. And here is the Pitts ready to fly airplane. I mean, everything's connected, everything's ready to go. So the first thing I always recommend doing is going through the owner's manual for these airplanes. These airplanes are very carefully engineered. And if there's notes, warnings, cautions, anything you should be aware of in the manual, it's probably worth looking at. So let's just take a look at some of the highlights of the manual. Safety precautions is pretty standard. Wingspan is 17.1 inches, 15.5 inches long. Notice it's very clear what's included: the motor, the receiver, the servos. However, needed to complete the battery, a charger, and the transmitter. Now, John did have a spare battery. They recommend a 200 milliamp. This is 300, close enough. I had to change out the connectors. This is a JST connector that I changed into the airplane, but if you buy the recommended battery, it should connect just fine. Pre-flight checklist is all fine. They talk a little bit about the AS3X stabilization. I think that this plane couldn't fly without the stabilization provided here, so you can read through that. There's a website with more information. Low voltage cutoff. Now, I do want to highlight the binding of this to the plane. Binding is where you take your digital transmitter and electronically connect it with a special handshake so that your model recognizes only that airplane. So Horizon does provide a website with binding instruction in case there's different transmitters. It's just bindandfly.com. But what I'm going to do is go over what I'm going to bind it to show you how to do it, because there's a few tricks involved, because there's no bind button or bind plug with these microelectronics. So what happens, the first thing you have to do on your transmitter, I'm using a DX6, and I think it has to be a DX4 or greater. I'll turn it on, and I want to make sure that the model that we're going to use is in the computer. If you look here, this is the Pitts airplane right here. It's important to have this selected beforehand, because when you turn it on in the bind mode, it has to recognize this model in the memory. So what we're going to do is turn the transmitter off at this time. The way to get this model, and we just lift off the battery cover, it's just a little tab here with two magnets that connect here, so it works fine to keep everything in place. This is the only removable hatch. And we can see, here's your little motor. This is where the battery goes. This is the new connector that I put on. And you have to peer inside, but the receiver and the two servos for the elevator and rudder are all in the brick back here. The way, and this is the important thing, the way these micro receivers go into the bind mode is you give it power without a transmitter signal. After about 5 seconds, when it doesn't see its connected transmitter, the light will flash very quickly on here, which means it's in the bind mode. That means I can bind it, and what I'll do to bind it, I'll just give you a pre-flight how to do that. Hold down the bind button while I turn on the transmitter, and you'll see that it'll go into the bind mode. And I keep the transmitter pointed away. You don't want it too close to the receiver to do this. So let's do that now. Always make sure the throttle's low, the transmitter is off. We're going to connect up the battery, make sure that the polarity is correct. So in this case, I'll put it with the red up. Okay, so now it's talking to everybody. We're going to wait about 5 seconds. Can you see that flashing light inside there for the receiver? Okay, that means it's looking to bind to a transmitter. So now with a transmitter, we make sure the throttle is low. I hold down the bind button, turn it away, and you can listen to it.
Binding. DSMX 22 milliseconds. Bind complete.
So now it is binded. So what's going to happen, you'll see here, and I'm not going to touch the model, we have to let it sit for 5 seconds to be steady for the AS3X to kick in. So I can just hear it kicking in. So the elevator's working, the ailerons are working, but I'm going to show you something. Notice when I pick it up, it's quiet. Because the AS3X has not kicked in yet, to make the AS3X kick in that very important activation, we have to give it just a little bit of throttle, which I'll do now. You hear it jittering? That is the magic of the receiver moving the servos very quickly to give it the AS3X input right there. So that jittering and all that is absolutely normal. That's the system doing its thing. So I will just put the battery here for now. I'm not going to put on the cover. We can see that the elevators up, down, rudder, right, left, ailerons, and then the throttle. There's plenty of throttle. I'm not going to have it go up now. Now, the one other thing I want to show you from the instruction manual is the recommended placement for the control arms are in the outer hole for everything, and that's where they are. That gives a minimal throw forward. If you really want more throw, you can put it into a closer one. I'm going to leave it outside. The other thing they recommend is for your initial flights, because it is an acrobatic airplane, to use 70% throw. So what I elected to do, instead of dual rates where I could have a switch error, I just went ahead and put everything in 70%, and I want to show you real quickly in the DX6 how we do that. We just push down on the scroll wheel. We go down to servo setup, push on the scroll wheel again. We go to travel, and then, travel right there. And then notice there's throttle, right aileron, elevator, rudder, left aileron. I put all of those at 70, so it's down at the 70%. So that way it's a little bit less than 100%. It's a little bit less throw, And I think that will be an important thing for the initial test flights, because this plane is going to scoot right along. So that's an overview of the airplane. I think let me go ahead. Oh, one thing, when you disconnect it, it's very important because you want it to, with the receiver, always to see the transmitter signal. Let's disconnect this first. Then we turn off the transmitter. That way it stays binded. So again, nice little motor mount screwed in, spinner, the propeller. This just fits in the tab. And just everything's pretty nice. It's got wheels. You can see the two separate aileron servos put in here. All the control surfaces are exactly neutral. The hinges look fine. You even have a little pilot inside. I think it's a nice little kit. And of course, we want to make sure it balances correctly with the battery in there. The balance point is located in the instructions. And that's essentially it. So I think we're all set to give it a flight. We'll just wait till we get some good weather and head out to the field to see how this works.
Yep.
Just got done with my very first test flight of this Pitts, and I am not sure I've been more impressed with a model airplane in my life. I've been flying for 50 years, a lot of airplanes, a lot of ARFs, built a lot, designed a lot. This plane was perfect. It took off straight. It didn't need an ounce of trim. It was steady. There's a fair amount of wind. It's dying down now, but there was enough wind going along. The AS3X technology, I'm a believer. For something like this, without it, I think the model would be just about uncontrollable. It was locked in, absolutely smooth, confidence. I'm astounded. So this is a great little kit. Thank you, John, for sending it along. I look forward to many more flights of this. I just couldn't be any happier. We're back from the flying field, and as I mentioned, at the field, it was just incredible, the Pitts model from E-flite. Everything worked fine. All the control throws were neutralized. I had it at 70% per the instructions, put in the battery, and the plane, you saw in the video, just took off as straight as can be, added a little bit of power, did some circling maneuvers, no acrobatic maneuvers with initial flight and then a landing pretty close to where I took off on my very first flight. The AS3X methodology, stabilization, works perfectly. It was a quite windy day. It wasn't gusty, but there was a fair amount of wind. You can hear it on the video. And the plane just flew like there was no wind at all. It just felt, as the literature says, locked in, full control. It just couldn't have flown any better. So to have this, take it right out of the box, plug it in, fly it, is pretty amazing, to include a takeoff from the ground and a landing right in front of you. So all in all, a very pleasant experience. I think it's well worth the money for this, and good luck with your flight of the Pitts.